Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Draft Friday, episode number 66. I am your host with Authors A.I. My name is Alessandra Torre, and today I am joined by author Kathleen Fine, and we're going to be talking about the steps to publishing your first debut book. And if you're interested in getting a traditional publisher, what that process is like, and some tips and advice for just navigating the path. So I am so excited to talk about this topic. I'm so excited to have you here, Kathleen. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your podcast. You guys, it's like a free little subscription you guys have to advice for authors. I love it. So I received my master's in reading education and my bachelor's in elementary ed. So I started out writing short stories. I've written almost 40 short stories, and I've had them published in various places like Leacher Magazine, Pen in Hand, Maryland Writers Association Anthology. And my debut novel, Girl on Trial, is going to be published in October of this year with Camcat Books Publishing. And I wrote it over 3 years ago, but it's just taken this long of the process to get the publisher, the agent, all of that. And then I'm currently on round 3 of edits with my second novel, which is called The Chesapeake House. And I wanted to talk about this because since I was just such a novice writer and I didn't know anything about the publishing process, I made so many mistakes along the way. I was literally nothing. I didn't have any writer, I didn't know anybody who wrote. So I had to learn everything on my own. So I just wanted to talk about this with anybody who's listening to this who's a new writer, or maybe you've been writing but you don't have a publisher yet and you want to get one. I just wanted to talk about things that worked for me and things that didn't, just so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made, basically.
I love that, and I love this topic. So let's go back kind of to the very beginning. So you obviously had written a lot of short stories. When did you decide, okay, I'm ready to write a novel? And is Girl on Trial your first novel, or did you have a couple that are like in a drawer somewhere that didn't go anywhere?
It is my first novel. I've had it in my head, the premise of it and all the main events, basically, for the past 15 years. And it's just been sitting there. I've had other careers besides writing. It was just a side hobby. And I finally, during COVID, which I guess lots of people did this during COVID, was trapped in my house. And my husband was working at a hospital 100 hours a week. And so I was alone with my 3 little kids. So I just forced myself to sit down and do it. So the first time writing it, I started it in 2020.
And when that first process, like what was that like? Did you get stuck at a certain period in time? Did you have a regular writing schedule? Were you figuring out, like, did you use Word? Did you use something else? Can you just kind of walk us through that process and any mistakes you made or things that you wish you'd done differently in the creation process?
Definitely. So for the first novel I wrote, I used Word, which I think is good for some people. For me, now that I've finished my second novel, I give the advice to people who have more than one narrator or have multiple timelines. I suggest using something different. For my second novel, used Scrivener, which I happened to see, I follow lots of different authors on Instagram, and I saw Sally Hepworth describing it to her audience, and I had never heard of it. And so I looked it up, and that's how I started using it. So I used Scrivener for my second novel. The reason I like it a lot better than Word, and I think a lot of writers will like this, is that it's kind of set up like if most people know about how to do PowerPoint. And so on the left-hand side, like PowerPoint, it has all of your chapters kind of set up like slides. And you can rearrange them by, if you want this narrator to speak here, or if you're switching timelines around, you can just switch everything around. With my first novel, I wrote everything past, present in a Word document. And when I had to go back and edit, if I wanted to change a timeline around for 300 pages, I couldn't remember, what happened where. And it just took so long. And then I also had to have a separate Word document about each character and a separate one about each parts of the setting. And it just was such a mess. And with Scrivener, I loved it because all in that one little side part, you could have a little section of describing the characters, a little section of describing the setting, a little section of research. And so it's all just so organized there. So I highly suggest authors to look into something like that. There's lots of ones. Scrivener's not the only one. I think, Scrivener's not perfect. I don't love it for doing, spelling or grammar check or anything. But it's perfect for organizing your thoughts.
I have to absolutely second this. I love Scrivener, and Scrivener is pretty inexpensive when you look at, compared to Word, it's cheaper than Word. And for the exact same reason that Kathleen said, if I can see everything, I can move around. I can also put placeholders. If I'm like, write this scene, write that scene. And I could just create like a little card for each scene that I need to write. And then it might turn out I don't need to write that once I, organized everything. And I can also just delete entire scenes, and it just puts it down like in my trash can. So if I want to bring it back, I can. There's just a ton of just really thoughtful features. I could do a whole episode. We should probably do an episode on First Draft Friday about Scrivener, because it's got just some really cool features, and it seems like there was definitely a novelist involved in the creation.
Right. And I still haven't learned all the tools. I just learned use what I need.
But
it seems like there's a lot.
Of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know there's other things like that, like Ulysses. And I think there are like a handful of other organizational things like that. But that was just the one that I saw Sally Hepworth talk about. So I used it because I like her books. So she's good at it.
I like her books too. Another cool thing about it, which I think will lead into another topic, is it has a really cool word count, like daily word count and project targets. So I use that a lot. So I say, okay, I want to write 70,000 words and I need to finish on this date. And I only write on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever date it is. And then it will calculate out how many words I need to write. And if one day I don't write enough, it just recalculates it instantly. If I write, a lot one day, it'll recalculate it. But each day I can see like how far I've gone on the graph, like, and how many words I have left. And then I get this pop-up like, oh, you hit your words, whatever. And I love that. And I think you and I were pre-chatting about like length of a book and how many words. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of when you're writing, how to know how long your book should be and how to space that out over time period to write?
Yeah, definitely. So with my first novel, I just had the idea in my head and just started writing. And I don't even remember maybe halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, I then was like, how many words, I didn't know how to judge when I was supposed to be done. So I looked up the industry standards, and, publishers look for a certain word count, and it's important to know that. And it's not just based on, middle grade, young adult. It's based on your genre also. So if you're a thriller writer, it might be a little bit shorter than a fantasy, which those books can be very long, or historical fiction. So you need to figure out what your word count's going to be kind of at the beginning, so then you can kind of make goals. And Scrivener has that tool where you can put your project goals. Maybe you want your novel to be 90,000 words, and then that'll kind of calculate however your daily goals. So it's really important to do a word goal count of words. And something I did for my second novel, I was maybe 1/4 of the way in, and I think I saw on social media that there's National Novel Writing Month, which is just a website. Anybody can join it. And it just has you for the month of November write 50,000 words for that month, which roughly is about 1,700 words a day. And you can follow people kind of like you would on social media, or have, add friends, but it just gives you inspiration to, if you see so-and-so has written 30,000 words and you're only on 20,000, that might make you want to write more. So for my second novel, I did that National Novel Writing Month, that whole thing, and I finished it for that. It gave me just so much initiative to do it. And November's, coming up soon. So even if you're in the middle of your book right now, you can still join in on that, and it'll give you just the chance to finish it. And with my first novel, a big problem with me with my word goal count is I would get stuck and I wouldn't know what to do in a chapter. And so I would just kind of put my laptop away and walk away for a couple days. And I've learned that instead of just stopping and walking away, just write a place setter, like something happens here, and move on to the next chapter or the next section or the next scene. That way you're not wasting any time walking away and, just thinking about it. Whether it be, they're going to fight in this part of the book, or they break up in this part, or whatever. Just write a place setter, and then you can come back to that later. And that'll just make it so you have no excuse to not at least write something for that part.
I love that. So when you get stuck in a scene, if you don't know what you want or the next line or how to finish it, just put a note to finish it later, a summary of what should happen, and go to the next scene.
Yeah. Or even if you don't even know what's going to happen, if you just know,
figure this out.
One sentence. Yeah. It's just better than nothing, just get it done.
I heard recently that I always use XXX like as that's what I'll put, and then I'll type like, insert name here, or, if there's a fact that I don't know or something, I always put XXX, and then later I search the book for XXX. But I recently heard an author say that, I believe it was TK, like TK or two letters together that don't naturally occur in any word. I mean, I'm sure there's a word somewhere that has TK, but they always use TK and then, a colon or whatever. And that's what they use as and then later, once they finish the first draft or starting rewrites, they just search for all of the TK places in the book. So I was like, oh, that might be better than XXX, because I do feel like I'm writing like a dirty novel when I have it all over my pages.
Yeah,
it's very glaring.
Definitely.
So you finished Girl on Trial, and Girl on Trial is what genre?
So it is a young adult contemporary crime mystery. So I didn't even intend it to be young adult when I first started writing it. I just had the idea in my head, but the main character is 16. So then I kind of honed in on the young adult part. And then my second novel is actually women's fiction suspense thriller. So I'm kind of moving up a little to the older people.
So what was the word count that Girl on Trial ended up being when you first started going out to publishers, and did it change by the time it's actually being published?
I think it has gone up and down between 80 and 90,000 words, like 50 times. I've just taken so much out, added so much on, but it's always been between 80 and 90, but I think it's been in the high, almost 90, and then it's been low. So I think it kind of has changed back and forth, depending on it. But that is so it's a little bit high for a young adult, but it's within range of what publishers are looking for.
So you had a completed first draft, and then tell us how you got from that to where you're at today as far as with this book. Did you do rewrites and edits? Did you hire an editor before you started reaching out to publishers, or what was that process?
So, the hardest thing when you finish your first draft, especially your first draft ever, is getting the nerve to ask somebody to read it. It's really scary. You're really vulnerable. And for me, I didn't know who to ask, and I didn't even really want to tell anybody that I did it. And so I ended up joining some social media writers groups. I joined some mom writers groups, just various writer groups, and they had beta readers on it. So I sent my first draft out to a couple beta readers that I found. And you can find beta readers if you just go into Facebook and just find, I mean, if you put in like writing groups, you'll find any. And if you're a mom or a business, whatever, like it doesn't, you'll find whatever category you are, thriller writer, you'll find that category. So that way I could just send the Word document over to them and get feedback. And that was important because I didn't have anybody close to me read it because I didn't want them to judge me, but B, I knew they weren't going to give me honest feedback. And so I needed somebody who just didn't know me and could just tell me.
Impartial third party.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I also did know a couple people that lived near me that I knew that didn't write in my genre, but they were writers. And so I did end up having one person who, a friend of mine, read it and sit down and give me feedback. So between the beta readers and my friend, I got enough feedback to do a few rounds of edits. And then I felt comfortable enough to then go looking for a professional editor to look for it. And I wish I had known about the Authors A.I. Marlowe tool at the time because I tested it out for my second novel. And I know you've talked about it on the podcast before, but it's amazing because it just does in 15 minutes, it'll tell you repetitive phrases, dialogue versus narrative language. I mean, it was just like, I wish I had known about that for my first novel. It would have made things so much easier. So if listeners don't know about that, they can just go on the Authors A.I. page and learn about it. But that would have been really helpful to know. So after that, I then looked for a professional editor. And again, I didn't know how to find one. So I eventually found the website readsy.com. I don't know if you've used it before, but I liked it because it's basically a list of editors who are, wanting to get hired.
Like and if you're not familiar and you're listening, it's like Angie's list of book professionals. So you can see them, you can read their reviews. They're vetted for the most, I mean, as vetted as someone can be. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so I looked for editor. I wanted a developmental editor who was going to look at the whole overall story rather than, spelling errors or that sort of thing. And I looked for ones that they put basically other books they've edited, and you can kind of look at their resume. And I picked a handful of ones that had edited books that I liked and that I admired their authors. And so then I basically applied for them to edit my book. And if the thing is, though, is that if you want to do that, editors are booked up so much in advance that, I had finished this and had to wait, I think, 5 months for my editor to get to it because she was so booked. But I wanted to wait for an editor that I saw had done a lot of books that I liked. And so I waited. And so I just had to sit there and wait 5 months for her to be ready for me. So a suggestion I have is that if you feel like, if you have your word count and goals and I'm going to be done by the end of the new, by 2024, I would suggest starting to look a couple months before that and kind of get one lined up. Just in case they're booked. And if they say, no, I'm wide open, then you don't have to rush into it. But I would definitely start looking sooner than later if you're almost finished your novel, because editors can be booked up pretty fast.
So you said, though, that you had a few editors, like you pinpointed a few editors. And so how did you then narrow it down to just one? Did you do sample edits at all, or?
I didn't do sample edits. They just are kind of on there and you have to send them your information. And a bunch of them were saying, I think you're allowed to apply to 5. And then I think one of them said yes, but she wasn't, and she was ready for me right away, but she was kind of like my 5th in line.
Sure.
And my number 1 person took a couple weeks to get back to me. So the other couple, I think maybe another one said yes, and I was just kind of waiting for the one I really wanted. And then the other 2 said that they were just way too booked to do it and couldn't. So I finally got the one that I wanted. But, they're so booked that, it just takes a long time to get a hold of one.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and then once she started with you, how long did it take her to go through your first draft?
I think I sent it to her, like, let's say June 1st. And I think she had like 6 weeks to 2 months to give me everything back. I can't remember now. But it seemed like a really long time for me, since I waited almost 6
months. That seems like a really long time. Yeah.
It's so long.
It's long enough for you to convince yourself. Tell me this, but that is like where a lot of my. Oh, I think I lost you for a minute. Are you there?
Oh, yeah. You kind of cut out, but yeah. So it's a long time. I mean, I remember it was the whole summer, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So after I got her edits, then I was able to really change things around, because she's looking at the whole overall picture. And, my beta readers and my friend who read it, they weren't giving me such thorough feedback. I mean, this was like an analysis, a few pages of an analysis. But it was, and you have to pay for it, but it's worth the money, because you want to have it as polished as possible before you try to get an agent or a publisher. So that was basically what I did before I got an agent.
Did she give you feedback that you just didn't know what to do with, or was it pretty easy?
Yeah, I mean, it took a long time. I think I first started out with I think I went in order of the easiest stuff to the hardest stuff. It took a long time. If it's your first time getting that much feedback, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever. So it did take a long time just to go through each thing, because they're not telling you what to do. They're just telling you this isn't working.
Yeah.
And so you need to
you're identifying the problems. You have to figure out the solution. Yeah.
Right. So it took a long time. So that whole process probably took a whole year of just getting it to where I thought it should be for an agent, basically. And then I started looking for agents. And there's lots of different ways to find, agents, like Publishers Marketplace and everything. One thing I did is I just looked up all the authors that my book was comparable to, or books that I loved, and I found those authors, and then I found who their agents were, or who their agencies were. And then I looked to see if they weren't taking queries. I looked to see if there were any other agents in their group that were taking queries, or if they even fit with what my book was like. Since my book is YA and contemporary, not all publishers take YA, or agents are looking for YA, and agents always put a wish list, and if they're just looking for fantasy or romance, it's just pointless and a waste of everybody's time to query them in the first place. So I made sure to make a spreadsheet, and that's something I did do right in the first time, just because I'm very organized and I like having things. So I just made my own spreadsheet of every agent, their email, what they're looking for, and if I was going to submit to them. And then whenever they did write back to me, I would, mark it off or make sure that I had a record of it, because you forget who you query after a while, after X amount of rejections. And so I made sure, and I really suggest, I think there's probably programs you can buy for organization for this, but I just did it on an Excel spreadsheet, of just organizing the agents. And that just is really important. So you don't forget who you've already queried.
And how many agents do you queried in total? And how many responses?
So I first started out. So I started out with like my top 5 agents I wanted, which was a mistake, because I looked at the biggest authors, that, bestsellers, and was like, I want their agents. And that was my mistake. because I queried them first. And my book, I thought was ready. It was not. And so I submitted to them first, and they're so busy, they are not even going to give you feedback. They just are like, no, thank you. It's not for me. I'll pass. So I kind of, in my spreadsheet, made a list of, it was kind of an order of most important. And then I went down the list, but I should have started out more of towards the middle of the list and worked my way up, because I kind of blew it and wasted it. And by the time I got down towards the middle of my list, I had already edited it probably 10 times, just from all of the feedback from what the agents gave me when they rejected me. So I used each tool as each rejection as a tool. And whenever they gave me feedback, whether it is I need more dialogue, or I'm not connecting with the main character, or whatever, I would then re-edit. And so it was kind of like little gold nuggets that I got with each rejection that I was able to then re-edit and update my manuscript. And so by the time I finally got my agent, it was basically all of the rejections that had made my novel as strong as it was. So I mean, over 50 I had queried. I have the list on my computer here somewhere, but it was a lot that I had queried. And I had started out with the top.
It's not a process I'm familiar with. I've never queried before. But like, what would be an example of like you would get a rejection letter and it would just have one or two suggestions, or would you get like a full breakdown, like an editorial letter of?
It depends.
Things?
And sometimes it's just, not for me. Sometimes it's just, no, I'll pass. And then sometimes they just say one line, like, I'm not connecting with the character, which was anything. I took anything I got. And there were maybe 2 or 3 agents who gave me 2 pages of feedback, which was, I mean, people pay for that.
Yeah.
And so I really used her feedback. And I mean, it took me a long time. It was basically paying an editor to tell you what you needed to fix. So I like profusely thanked her for that feedback. So, I mean, every agent's different. Obviously the top ones aren't going to give you much feedback.
Did you send back to her or no? Like, would you make changes and send back?
The ones that I think there were maybe 2 that I had sent back to, but the other ones I think just were like, I'll pass, but this is the feedback, and I didn't want to.
Right.
They got hundreds. Right.
Well, we only have 2 minutes left, and I know that you probably have more things you want to share. I just do want to say, though, you are so brave. A lot of debut authors, like, this process that you're describing sounds terrifying. Like, you're like, oh yeah, they said no, but they gave me this and I changed it. Like, a lot of authors would go and cry in a room for 4 days, So did you always
after the 50th time you get used to it, I think the first couple, and nobody ever says anything mean, at least in my experience. No, people would just say no. And I am sensitive, and it's always tough when you get a no, but you get so many that I just had to learn to grow. I grow from it and learn from what they had to say. But luckily for me, I didn't get anybody saying like, this is terrible, you're a horrible author. Yes. I just got, I'm not connecting with this person, or, whatever. Nothing was ever enough where it was going to make me go cry. And I really suggest people to use whatever any agent says and use it to better their manuscript.
So can you, in 60 seconds, no pressure, tell us how you ended up getting your publishing deal, and if there were any advice or mistakes that you made in that process?
So I eventually, had probably edited my novel at least 30 to 40 times. I mean, after each rejection, I at least changed a few things in my novel. And by the time, and then I started submitting to publishers, because there are some publishers who do accept unagented. So I actually ended up getting my publisher first. And then the next day, my agent wrote to me and said she was interested in me. So it was like within 2 days, I got them both. But I really do think it was just persistence and just every time you get a no, and especially if you get 50 no's like me, that you just have to keep using what they say and making it better. Because if you're getting 50 no's, then there's probably some things you need to change. So I really suggest just continuing to be open to edit and improve it as much as possible.
But you already have book 2. So was book 2 with the same publisher and the same agent?
So book 2, I have the same agent, and we are going to shop around publishers. Right now, she's read it and she's given me feedback. So we're on round 3 of edits with the same agent. But we're going to shop around publishers and see if we can work anything else out. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, advance congrats on the upcoming release. Can you just share the release date and again the name, just in case they missed it?
It's October 24th with Camcat Books, and it's called Girl on Trial.
Girl on Trial. Yeah. Fantastic. And it is a hardcover release, right? Yeah. So it'll be hardcover and ebook.
And audiobook and ebook.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much. We have some comments. Thank you for the great information. Another person said they're surprised to hear you got feedback from any agent. Most say they don't have time. And hello to everyone on YouTube too. I see your comments. So thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this broadcast, we encourage you to check out more at Authors.ai or wherever you watch your video podcast. And we'll be back in a week or two with another First Draft Friday. So thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you to everyone who joined us.